Father, what do Eastern Catholics think of the feud between the Novus Ordo and the Traditional Latin Mass?
Every Eastern Catholic probably has a different position. Some, perhaps they're like, I just want to be Eastern. I don't want to get involved. In some cases, you have people who have been in the Western world who've become Eastern. You tend not to find polarization around the liturgy too much in the Eastern world. We have our own issues, and that tends to not be one of the bigger issues. So there are local customs as to how liturgy is applied and done, and at the same time, a very strong adherence to the received tradition. So it's tough to become polarized over that. You get different permutations from parish to parish, but you just don't see it. So it depends from person to person. Some people will look at it and they've come from that world, and now they're Eastern, and it's really different. It depends who you talk to. People are as opinionated in the East as they are in the West. So,
what? No way. Say it ain't so. West is never opinionated. We got opinions. Those are ridiculous. No, Father. You know what's really interesting is sometimes when I kind of contrast the Novus Ordo and the Traditional Latin Mass, I see elements in the Novus Ordo that I see in Divine Liturgy. So, for instance, in Traditional Latin Mass, usually you'll have an altar rail utilized more. And so therefore the priest will kind of, people will go through the altar rail rather than the priest will kind of go down the line, where in Divine Liturgy or in a lot of Novus Ordos, right, you kind of form a singular line and then the priest stands, it's kind of at a fixed point, and the people kind of go up to the priest in that sort of way. So I always kind of wonder, I haven't done enough research, but I'm like, man, in the writings of the Mass of Pope Paul VI, I wonder how many of those liturgical reformers saw some of those elements in the East, and whether they executed it well or not, it's a different story, but nonetheless saw them and thought to maybe bring them over to the West in some of the reformations.
You're really insightful. That's exactly what was happening. So you had liturgical scholars who were looking at all the different ritual inheritance of the different Catholic rites, and in many cases the Orthodox, and just different practices. And they would often be referenced and say, they do this here, let's use that. So for example, the current form for the conferral of the sacrament of confirmation in the West is our prayer for chrismation in the East. It's actually the Easter prayer. So you see certain things that have been adopted. And in some cases, what I notice is that something that makes sense within the ethos of the Eastern liturgy doesn't make as much sense within the ethos of the Western liturgy. So you might have something, for example, this is something maybe I've seen over the years in the Western liturgy, where you have the kids come up and gather around as the gospel's being read or something, and maybe a parish with a more progressive kind of approach. In the East, that's more standard for us, but it makes sense that we would have people come up and gather around the gospel, because there's an emphasis on the whole of salvation history playing out. The whole economy of salvation is sort of manifested in a holistic way. And the point where the gospel is read is a recapitulation of the Sermon on the Mount and of Christ's teaching. So people are actually there's a liturgical rationale for that. We don't do it because it's cute. There's liturgical rationale. It fits into a bigger picture. So there are a lot of practices I've noticed in the Reformed Western liturgy that looks to me like, this was borrowed and that's borrowed. And my own hesitation in those elements is that they can lose their integral meaning if they're not part of that liturgical tradition. And so you end up almost with perhaps at times a syncretism, as you found in the East before the Second Vatican Council in some of our churches, where we had all these different practices mixed and they didn't always make sense, in the context wasn't there. Similarly, you can sometimes see that if you're just, sort of plucking well, they do this over here, let's do it here. The meaning can be lost, I think. It's a kind of a dangerous practice. That's where I've sort of emphasizing the idea of organic development and highlighting the importance of adhering to the received tradition as we live out the liturgical life of the church.
So my question is, I know in the Western Rite, there's a lot of controversy going on. Some of the clergy and lay people are, recognizing and resisting the new idea of the synodal church. Curious if the Eastern Catholic Rite is also in the same boat, or the synodal church does not apply to the Eastern Catholic Rite, only to the Western Rite.
It's a good question. There's been a lot in the last few years, and in the Catholic media, you get all these different opinions. And I think one of the things is the question of where is the sort of synodal idea in the West driving, because you have the received tradition with the relationship between the popes and bishops and local dioceses. What does this look like? Where are they headed? And it's something where in the East, for us, the history was synodal. So it was particularly, you had councils of bishops with a certain authority that was there. Now, the Orthodox bring that to the level of conciliarism, where the bishops run everything and there isn't a visible head. And now for Eastern Catholics, we're in communion with the Pope, and we'll have a synod of Melkites, we have a synod of bishops with a patriarch. But ultimately, the communion with Rome means that we're not sort of just separate doing our own thing, that there is a reference. So when one of our bishops is elected, the Pope will confirm that election. So there's a communion there, but there is a synodal structure at the level of the episcopate, the patriarch, and the Pope. There's not this idea, and I think this is maybe where some of the controversy comes in the West, the idea that synodality, whatever that happens to mean, that it involves having lay voices in the synod, acting almost as if they were bishops, a confusion really between hierarchy and laity, and something where there's a process that seems kind of maybe amorphous. Maybe I'm picking up on some buzzwords, but we have this history of synodality in the East, and I could see how maybe that inspired what's happening in the West to a degree. But authentic synodality from the Eastern tradition involves the hierarchy, the bishops and patriarchs, and ultimately the Pope collectively governing the church, and everything that's dogmatically implied by that, in terms of what the nature of the papal office is visible head with the plenary authority that's there. And so for Eastern Catholics, we already have a synodal structure, but it's not something where it's transgressing the lines between laity and ordained. There's an idea of a reliance on the divine inspiration and the authority that's there. That's my kind of immediate reaction to your question.